Hello everyone, I'm Jared, and thanks for tuning into the last E3 2017 press conference recap and review video right here on Gamerslice. So in this video I'm going to be going over and evaluating what Sony showed at their press conference. To start off, they opened with a live musical performance just like last year, only instead of an orchestra, it was a bunch of, I guess, like native instruments to India or Tibet or wherever. Not Tibet, but wherever Uncharted The Lost Legacy is taking place, because that's the game they opened up with. The music accompaniment was a bunch of musical instruments from that region, lute type things, and like interesting flutes. So they opened up with that. Unfortunately, in the stream I watched, there was a problem with the audio, but I went back and watched some of the stuff that I couldn't hear. And the trailer's pretty good. I mean, the game, I've even seen a bit on Uncharted The Lost Legacy since then, and it is looking to be basically on par with any other Uncharted game. Maybe won't have the full like emotional story moments that Uncharted 4 has, but it's definitely on par with the other ones as far as the action, as far as possibly the set pieces, just the overall adventure that you're going to go through. And it seems like a large part of the game is going to be very open, much like the Madagascar chapter in Uncharted 4, which I'm very glad to see. I doubt, I don't think Naughty Dog will ever do something that's totally open world, at least not in the near future, but they may try to pioneer some sort of a new like semi-open world, I guess kind of expanding on the hub area type of game level design. Furthermore, I'm actually quite excited to play as Chloe because she didn't really get a good send-off from Uncharted 3, so we'll finally get to see more of her, just what she's been up to after this, and a bit more on Nadine's backstory, because she was a pretty interesting character. And although this musical opening to the conference was not quite as good as the orchestra from last year, it was still pretty solid, and I would like to see Sony continue doing live instrumental openings for the conference. It's really been a staple, and I think that they can capitalize on that. So after that, we got a reveal of what might be the first or might be the only DLC for Horizon Zero Dawn. It's called The Frozen Wilds, and it's coming, no set date, but it's supposed to be coming sometime in 2017. The Frozen Wilds takes you to a snowy region, which there are snowy regions in the base game, but this one seemed to be pretty much all snow and maybe some other stuff. But overall, it did kind of give me a vibe from one of the regions and one of the quests that I had already done and the areas I had went to. But nevertheless, it seems like it's just probably going to be more of what the game already offered, and also just digging more into Aloy's character. And I have checked the price. I think it's going to be $15, or at least that's if you pre-order it, but I think full price might be $20, so it might be worth looking into if you liked Horizon Zero Dawn. I still haven't finished the base games yet because I encountered some setbacks, but when I do, hopefully this summer, get around to finishing it up, I may also pick this up. And actually, now that I think about it, I did look into it afterwards, and I think the DLC is coming sometime in November. So I still have a while to finish that up. If I do, I will probably pick up this DLC and do a review on the DLC itself. And I'll probably put some sort of video out between now and then, just talking about my thoughts on the base game. Before moving on, I'll also mention that for this one, they actually had like some snow effects, some like snow particles or whatever falling from, the ceiling in the theater to show this one off. So I thought that was cool. I imagine it was just like paper flakes or something like that. But it looked really cool, and people were like looking up and everything. So Sony definitely does know how to create a spectacle right there in the theater. In a good way, of course. Next up, we have more of Days Gone, which has further surprised me at this E3. I'm not into zombie games that much, and of course, I think they call them freakers in Days Gone. But I was quite impressed with like the fluid like waves of like zombie hordes in the last one they showed, and they're just like climbing all over each other, and they just won't stop coming. It's pretty impressive, and they showed off more of that in this demo, but they also showed some more of maybe what you're going to be doing in the open world areas or in between main missions. Not really sure if there's going to be like free roaming, or if the storyline at least is going to be more linear. But we saw quite a bit more things from this gameplay demo. For one, we saw some of like riding the motorcycle around the world, which I'm excited to play that and ride the motorcycle and see how it feels. And certainly if you're going to be riding it a lot to get around the world, it's going to want to have some fluid driving mechanics. And I'm also curious if you'll be able to drive any cars in that game, or if it's just going to be motorcycles. Because it seems like almost everybody in that game is like part of a biker gang or something. It's really funny. What I think this gameplay demo really accomplished, though, was it made the world feel alive. And it did this through the various encounters that seemed pretty unique and at random. Well, sort of at random. And the high quality animations, as well as like the top notch sound effects. Even the birds chirping in the forest. It just all set the mood right. And then it's like, you hear the birds chirping, it sounds nice and calm. And then he stumbles across this horde of zombies just feasting on dead corpses and animals, humans, whatever. So it just kind of like that dynamic between those two things was quite impressive, and it just made the world feel alive and dangerous. Not to mention that these zombified creatures like the wolves and bears were done quite well, and the bear especially at the end of the demo was done quite creatively. He had like barbed wire wrapped around his face or her face. So that was really impressive. And I mentioned the animations before. In some of like the cutscene areas, like the facial animations are absolutely top notch. You can see like every little like movement of the eyebrow and the eyes and then the lips and the cheek. Just every little detail you would expect from, say, some other Sony first-party studio like Naughty Dog on the level of what you would see in Uncharted 4. Now, I'm having a bit of a hard time gauging public opinion on Days Gone, but if most people are as intrigued by it as I am, then this could really be the game that puts Sony Bend on the map as a studio. Because Sony Bend has been around for quite a while, and I know they've produced some noteworthy games, but I can't really think of any. But this might be the one that really, like, when you say Sony Bend, they'll be like, oh yeah, they're the ones that made Days Gone. But that is yet to be seen. Next up was Monster Hunter World, which was coming early 2018, and cool thing is, like, as far as I'm aware of, this has been a Nintendo exclusive to the DS and stuff like that before, I think, like 3DS Monster Hunter, but this is Monster Hunter World. The graphics were actually really, really good, and I just think the concept of Monster Hunter is really cool, at least in the way that they did it in this, they're doing it in this game. So it's got a lot of interesting mechanics, which I'm not going to go into detail about it because I could talk a lot about them. But a lot of them are very similar to like Shadow of the Colossus, at least when it comes to fighting the bosses, because you can like climb on them and all that. And it also seems really fast-paced, and it's actually pretty exciting to see Monster Hunter finally come to PlayStation platform, where I think it will probably have an even bigger audience than what it has had in the past. It's still hard to say whether this will be a day one buy for me, but as long as any other big games that I know I want to get are not coming out around the same time, like give or take 3 or 4 weeks, then this will absolutely be a day one buy for me. As long as no problematic things develop, like something like Shadow of War, which has microtransactions now. That's kind of unfortunate. I'm still going to get Shadow of War because I know, Shadow of Mordor was good, and the Nemesis system seems really fleshed out this time. But for something like Monster Hunter World, where I haven't played a Monster Hunter game, if something like that comes out surrounding the game, then that probably would take it off the day one buy list for me. Now, speaking of Shadow of the Colossus, it is getting a remake, which is coming 2018. So that's really exciting. The graphics are pretty substantially updated, I would say. So it's good quality for a remaster, but I don't think it's like a remake or anything. So we're probably just going to get better graphics, and it's going to be ported to current gen hardware. We're also getting a new Marvel vs. Capcom game coming September 19, and it looks pretty good. There's actually a story demo out now, so it'll have like a campaign, and then it's basically like Injustice. They're going that route. I don't know if the first Marvel vs. Capcom had a story, but it looks pretty solid, and if you're a fighting game fan, it's probably another good one to check out, especially if you're a fan of like Capcom and Marvel characters. Now, as everyone knows, Call of Duty is going back to its roots this year with Call of Duty World War II, and this one is made by Sledgehammer Games. It's coming out November 3rd. The trailer was very cinematic for this one, which could be misleading because there wasn't like full gameplay, and even what was kind of like gameplay, like what we saw in Battlefield 1's supposed gameplay trailer, was just all prettied up and no HUD. So it's got that real cinematic feel to it. So we did get some of that, but there was also a lot of just cinematic shots from like different angles as well. So I wouldn't describe it as a gameplay trailer of any sort, just kind of a cinematic reveal trailer. I think it will still have that modern Call of Duty feel that a lot of people expect from it, but at the same time, me not being a fan of the recent Call of Duty games, it is a game that I think will bring me back in to play it, because it does seem to go back to the roots enough for the campaign, I think it might be less of a shooting gallery, especially with some of the stuff I've heard about it, where you can't auto heal, no automatic health regeneration. You have to actually get a medic to heal you, so that's cool. And it's it's more immersive than health packs in like the original Call of Duty games. So I think they could have a winner on their hands this time with Call of Duty World War II, but who knows about the multiplayer, how they're going to handle that, if that's going to be any different, and that's what it's really going to come down to. I have seen small tidbits of gameplay from the multiplayer, though, that people at the Call of Duty event got to play, and it looks pretty good so far. It doesn't seem as much like running around like a chicken with your head cut off like it was before, but that might just be the mode that they were showing off and the people playing, so I'd have to get my hands on it to really say for certain. So from there, Sony transitioned into their VR segment, of which the first VR game they showed off was Skyrim VR. Pretty much the same as Doom VR and Fallout 4 VR. If you want me to hear me talk about those, you can go watch the Bethesda press conference recap and review. But the Skyrim VR is somewhat similar to like Fallout or Doom and Fallout VR, but maybe a little more so with Skyrim VR. It does seem a bit rough. It needs lots of polish. The animations for like the sword swiping seem kind of janky and like it might be unreliable. Maybe you try to swing, but it doesn't register the swing properly. So I don't know, we'll have to see. And then also, same thing what I said with Fallout 4 and the Bethesda ones, traversing a large open world like that with VR controls or whatever's given to you, if you have to like teleport around the map by like pointing or whatever, could be very problematic. So we'll have to see how that works out. The next VR game they showed, though, was something that I think a lot of people assume VR is for the first-person games, but a lot of people are saying, hey, they're not taking full advantage of third-person games. And it is sort of hard to see how that will work. I mean, first-person is the obvious fit, but third-person games could work out pretty well as well. However, one of them that I have never thought of doing in VR is a 2D game. So the game they showed off next was Star Child, which is kind of a 2D adventure platformer. It's got light platforming elements. It's not a platformer at its core, but sort of like the Little Big Planet thing where it looks like a 3D environment, although I don't know if there's actual depth to this one. You might be just running along one single plane, one single dimension, but the elements do pop out of the background, and it seems like it's mainly for like adventure and story and just kind of an experiment to see what can we do with VR in a 2D side-scrolling type of space. And then after that we had The Inpatient, which seems to be like a psychological horror thriller. I think you might be trapped in like an insane asylum or a mental institution or something like that. It's kind of like a teaser trailer, so it's not entirely clear what the game is, but it's definitely, I would describe it as like psychological horror and thriller, and it could work fairly good. And since it may not be relying on crazy jump scares or really dark environments, it might be a horror game that I'd rather get into. Not that I get scared of those other horror games, but it's not really my cup of tea, and a lot of times those games rely on jump scares, which doesn't really scare you, it just kind of startles you, and I just don't really go for that. The next VR game was Monster of the Deep Final Fantasy 15. It's coming out September 2017, and wouldn't you know, this is crazy. Who would have ever thought Final Fantasy would have turned into a fishing game? But that's what they're doing in VR. They had another VR game they showed off last year. I don't remember exactly how that one worked, but this one is basically just a Final Fantasy fishing game where you're catching like just crazy fish that fit into the Final Fantasy 15 universe, and there was like some awesome metal track going along with it. It was pretty cool and kind of got up the tension. And a lot of those, if you played those old fishing games, whenever you like hooked a large bass or something like that on the line, it would play some dramatic music. So it kind of gave me like vibes of those old games that I used to play. But overall, I think a fishing game is a great game for VR, but I never thought it would be Final Fantasy that would be the one to do it. And after that, we have Bravo Team, which is a modern military shooter for VR, very much along the lines of Insurgency. Of course, there's a lot of like, it's basically just going to be cover based, so it's probably going to be like an arcade game or one of those on-rail shooters just designed for VR. So you're going to have a little more freedom, and you're probably going to get to move when you choose to. So it's not going to be as on rails, but it's kind of playing off that concept. So this could be pretty good. And it's modern military shooter, but since it's in VR, I think a lot of people will be more enthused to play it. than your next like Call of Duty game, Medal of Honor, or just some other modern military FPS like Homefront. Not that people aren't enthused to play those games already. I mean, like, Call of Duty is really big still, but of course, as we all know, the popularity has been waning over recent years. So that's Bravo Team for you. And then the last VR game they showed off was called Moss. Based on the trailer, to me it looks like it's an adventure and light action game. Maybe not so much light action, but definitely light puzzle. And it's also seems like it's very similar to or inspired by something like Stuart Little, and it has an art style of Armello. Yeah, it may just be because the main character is a rabbit, and like Stuart Little, it might take more inspiration from Stuart Little than Armello, but kind of the art style seems more like Armello. But the gameplay is nothing like that. But this is kind of an isometric, sort of like Star Child, only probably the camera, as I said, more isometric. Maybe you will rotate around like Spectacle Fighters or something like that. So this is, for all intents and purposes, it's basically the closest thing that I've seen so far to a third-person game in VR. So we'll have to see how Moss works out. Then after there was this weird moment. I don't know if they accidentally played it too soon or what it was, but there was this 10-second or less PS4 Pro, I guess you could call it an ad, but it just showed like 2 or 3 shots of the PS4 Pro with a little bit of music, and then it just, boom, it cut off. And then they transitioned to the next game they showed, which was God of War, making its return this year. But that PS4 Pro ad, whatever, seemed really out of place, so I'm just guessing they played it too soon, and that was the beginning of their like sizzle reel thing at the end. So yeah, God of War made a return this year, and it's coming out early 2018. And what they showed is continuing to get me excited for it. The combat looks really good. The shield abilities, like you can use your shield and bash enemies, but some of the ways, like when you initiate combat, the shield will like fold out, and then you bash an enemy back and attack it. So I thought that looked really cool. And the combat, as before, looks really meaty and really satisfying. It seems like every time you attack an enemy, it's going to feel like you're actually doing some serious damage to them, which I think restructuring how God of War plays from a gameplay standpoint is a perfect fit for exploring new mythology, especially Norse mythology, where, with that Viking combat, Viking and Norse, you have to have the in-your-face, brutal combat. And I think that changing it to a third-person perspective, making it a bit slower, really helps evoke the feeling they're going for. As far as the story goes, I'm really excited to see Kratos as a father figure. I think it's already seems to be turning out pretty good. And maybe it's just me, but I clearly see a lot of inspiration from The Last of Us. How Joel is the protector of Ellie, but Ellie is kind of learning to fend for herself. And I see that thing very much going along with Kratos and his son, and it's only a slightly different dichotomy because Kratos is teaching his son these things, and combined with Norse mythology, it's kind of expected, whereas in The Last of Us, Ellie was kind of foisted upon Joel, and he kind of just had to make do with it, whereas, in this one, it's kind of Kratos is doing his fatherly duties in a way. But I think that dynamic's going to work out really good, and the game, I just gotta say, it also looks really pretty. So, very excited for God of War. Next up, we had Detroit Become Human make a return. And to be honest, I gotta say, I like the type of gameplay structure they're going for in this game. It's a very interesting concept, being the leader of the android revolution and playing as maybe multiple androids, kind of like what Heavy Rain did, where you play as multiple characters. But it's not really getting me to sympathize with the androids. So, like, my heart's not really invested in it. So I don't know if this game will really be something I'm interested in playing. I'm closer to having sympathy for them since they are very realistic looking androids, and there's barely anything that actually distinguishes them from the portrayal of humans in video games. But nevertheless, just knowing that they're androids, it's kind of like, well, they don't actually have souls. They're not actually human. So, type of thing. They should be slaves to us. We created them. They're machines. But at the same time, I do understand what they're going for, but I don't know if it's something that I can personally get invested in. And it's clear that one of the underlying themes of Detroit Become Human is a commentary, or rather asking the question of, what if technology progresses to this extent? What are we to do with it? How are we to treat androids? Like, what happens when humans almost seem to become obsolete, and as people like rise of the machines type thing. So we're dealing with those type of issues, and that's going to be kind of the underlying theme of this game, where the direct theme that's put in front of you is just you are one of the android, you're leading the android revolution, so bring it to its full potential, and succeed. I guess the ultimate goal of the game. And who knows, they're probably going to offer the choice, and there's like, to what extent do you go? Are you just fighting for android rights, or are you going to totally like take over the entire country and be like, you guys have put us androids through so much, we're taking it over, we're the new rulers of the land? So how far do you go? I think that's going to be a big decision point towards the end of that game. Honestly, since I can predict it so well right now, I don't know if it's even really worth playing. Is it even going to tell that engaging of a story? So we'll have to wait and see. But that's just my opinions on Detroit Become Human. Since this is one of the games I'm least enthusiastic for, but the concept still intrigues me a lot, or the gameplay style at least, I would like to hear your guys' comments about Detroit Become Human in particular, if you've read up on the game or seen the gameplay of it. Let me know what you think, because I would guess that most people have a different perspective on it than I do. Second to last, we have Destiny 2, which is coming out September 6th. And all I really have to say about this, there's, the beta's already been out. You can, you've probably already heard about it if you're interested in Destiny 2 or even played the beta. So all I will say is that from the E3 stuff they showed at the press conference, it does seem to have quite a bit more semblance of story, which I like, but we'll have to see if that's totally fleshed out in the full game. And also, PlayStation is getting exclusive content, which, hey, I know people aren't going to like that, but that's just how things are these days. I honestly don't think it's a good thing. If you're going to make an exclusive game that's, the entire franchise is exclusive, that's fine with me. But if you're like buying exclusives, especially like something like Rise of the Tomb Raider was a timed exclusive for Xbox One, or you have exclusive content on a certain platform, that's just kind of scummy. But that's how it is. And to be honest, with a lot of these games though, the content is not too substantial, so you're probably not missing out on much if you're buying it on a different platform. And lastly, we have the upcoming Spider-Man game by Insomniac. It's coming 2018, and I don't know exactly if the full name, it might just be called Spider-Man, who knows. But what they showed off, it was a great game to end the show with. A lot of people weren't even expecting them to show it off, like anything off this year, like substantial for it. But this was actual gameplay, probably some sort of a main story mission. The takedowns were cool, the combos you could do looked really good. The movement was really fluid, both in combat and web slinging around the city. That was really good. And the stealth mechanics worked really well. The spectacle of all the moves looks really cool as well. So it just seems like it's going back to what people liked about some of the earlier Spider-Man games, especially with the fluidity of traversing the city. The only problem that I saw in the demo that they showed, though, was during certain segments they seemed to rely a bit too strongly on QuickTime events. And I can actually think of other ways that, like, for instance, when the crane was falling down, there's ways you could have done that without a QuickTime event. It may not feel as cinematic, or it might feel more gamey, but they didn't have to resort to QuickTime events. But maybe that's the feeling they want to go for. I think it could work, but if, like, every major story mission is going to have quite a few QuickTime events like that, then it's just going to be too QTE heavy. So they're going to need to tone that down a bit. But all I would say is, I don't know how far along in development the game is right now, but if I could talk to the development team personally, which, I won't be able to, but if I could, I would basically suggest just be creative, think of as many ways as you can to handle those type of situations without using QTEs. And if it feels kind of broken, or just takes you out of the mood if you have to do the other things, or if it's just too hard, then yeah, you can resort to QTEs, but don't use that as your first resort all the time. But overall, I thought the Spider-Man game looked really cool, and it's probably going to be a day one buy for me, assuming everything up to that point seems to be on the level. So that wraps it up for Sony's press conference, and the final verdict is an A-. I think Sony did a great job this year. It wasn't as strong as last year, and it was just solid and consistent. And that's one of the key words I think you could say for this entire E3 this year. None of them were like super like hype fests like Sony was last year and Bethesda was in 2015. But I mean, I think in many ways it's good. Across the board, though, the press conferences overall were much more consistent and pretty solid. I mean, I think the lowest score I gave was to Ubisoft, which with like a B minus or something like that, or maybe that was Bethesda's at a B minus. I don't really remember, but I don't think anybody got a C this year, which was great. And Microsoft and Sony both get an A minus. I still think I have to declare Sony as the winner, though, because Microsoft's was a bit overwhelming, and truth be told, a lot of what they tried to pass off as being Xbox exclusive stuff, you could either play on PC at the same time on launch, or they were like console launch exclusives, and they were probably going to be coming to the PlayStation or maybe even Nintendo platforms later on. So there was kind of a bit of cheating or obfuscation there on Microsoft's part, but they still did have a lot of games, and it was overwhelming though. And on a per game basis, they had about as much exposition or people coming out on stage and talking about the games as Sony did. I think Sony's overall, though, it was shorter. The spacing in between large big games that impressed people was much better, and many of the games too, I think, probably showed a more in-depth look at the game, and some of them were larger scale games we hadn't seen anything of prior to this. But it was very close, and Sony only comes off on top because I'm forcing myself to declare a winner. So Sony is the winner this year as they were last year, but everybody put on really solid press conferences this year, and I would like to see this. I think they could continue this into next year. So anyways, that wraps it up for E3 coverage for 2017 in the Sony video. So again, let me know what you guys think in the comments, especially about Detroit Become Human. And I'm also going to put my most anticipated games shown at E3, maybe top 5 or top 10 or even top 20 in the description below. My top 5, by the way, though, are Metro Exodus, God of War, Shadow of War, Days Gone, and A Way Out. And some honorable mentions or runners-up to that are Star Wars Battlefront 2, Wolfenstein II, Spider-Man, Beyond Good and Evil 2, and the little indie game called The Last Night, which was visually breathtaking. So I might try to condense the entire list down to 10, which I just read off 10 of them for you right there, but I might put 10 more in there. But at least for the top 5 that I mentioned, I might even go back later on and put timestamps for the time I've talked about those in other videos, so direct links to the time I've talked about that in the description. So if you want to, for some reason, if you wanted to hear me, if you haven't watched the other ones, and you wanted to hear me talk specifically about my most anticipated games, you've already heard God of War and Days Gone, but Metro Exodus, Shadow of War, and A Way Out, I'll probably link those down in the description. So thank you guys for watching this video, and until next time, we hope to see you guys in the next one.
Please don't screw this up.